Code Concepts with Pete and Rachel. So we are here again this morning to talk all the good, the bad, and the ugly of code enforcement. So good morning, Pete.
Good morning, Rachel. How you doing? How's life out there in Colorado
I
right
think you
now?
might have froze.
Oh, just
Good morning,
keep
Pete.
on going. Go ahead. Can you hear me? Oh, so anyways, we're here. We're in two different places. Rachel, can you hear me? Oh, Rachel keeps going in and out. So anyways, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We have a lot of cool stuff going on. So Rachel, can you hear me? Are you on, Rachel? Hello? Okay. Wow, this is embarrassing, but it's okay. We're gonna just keep on going. We're gonna pivot. So, so today, this today we're gonna talk about different things going on in code enforcement. One of the things that we see is the lack of mental health in code enforcement training and police officer training. So there was an article that came out, and I'll go ahead and post the articles later on in the show in regards to the lack of code enforcement training. one of the things One of the things that stood out in this article was the fact that the police officers normally get about a month's worth of training in mental health, and in that month they only do about 1 week of scenario training, if that. And a lot of them feel that it doesn't give them the adequate tools to properly address some of these mental health issues. And I'll give you an example. For A lot of times, code enforcement officers, they go into people's homes, especially like hoarders or those kind of individuals, and it's really really hard to understand if you don't have any proper training. And there is a lot of things that we as code officers can do to be able to address these types of situations. So number one is understanding why there's hoarding disorders going on. A lot of times you have people dealing with depression. A lot of people grew up in the time where things were scarce, like World War II era. Like you have some of these senior citizens in that type of environment, and it's really hard for them to let go. They had to really hang on to things. Sometimes you see people that tend to hang on to stuff, and it's really it's especially if a loved one died. And I had a in the city where I last served as a code enforcement manager for the city of Montebello. I had a gentleman whose mom died in 1985, and he was having the hardest time cleaning anything that had to do with his mom. He had a very big attachment, and it was just hard for him to throw anything away. If it was if a can of oil, a can of tuna, and it was just really really unfortunate. And we had a mental health services specialist go out there and start guiding them, start talking to him in regards to the items. And the thing about mental health is that this particular individual had a lot of food in that he was also hoarding, and it would cause rats to come to his home. And it was just a bad mess. So when you walked in, it got to a point where it was really unsafe for the code enforcement officers to walk in there. We had to wear protective gear, the Tyvek suits, the respirators, because it was so much urine and rat feces in that particular area. And I mean, everywhere you went, you see little pellets of stuff. So mental health is an important component of code enforcement. A lot of times we deal with people that had schizophrenia, or they're recovering narcotics users, and we go out there and we're talking to these folks, and there's a lot of things that can trigger them. So mental health is a very important thing. It's a very good article in regards to the lack of training in code enforcement. There's so many items out there that we need to focus on in regards to mental health. Sometimes we deal with the transient issue. And me as a code enforcement director, I never advocate for somebody to make contact with transients if they don't have to, if because you never know what's going on. A lot of times it could be somebody on drugs. Sometimes it could be somebody severely depressed or going through an episode of psychosis, or something to that effect. So let me see. Actually, we got some chats here. Let me see. We have the Colorado Association saying, "Hey, Rachel." We have Cynthia, good morning from Fullerton, and we have Melvin from Redlands. Great. It's awesome. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We have Rachel on the line. She's having some technical issues, but we are pivoting. We're continuing. That's why we have two people here to continue our chat. But it's great stuff. And back to the transient issue. A lot of times it's always best to go out there with your law enforcement agencies in order to be able to address some of these issues. So um, so here's another one that we ended up having, and I encourage everybody to start. If you have any topics, anything going on, please feel free to chat, comment, and we'll go ahead and put something on here. We have somebody saying aloha. Hey, look, it's Matt Cozy Lion coming in from LinkedIn. We have Mr. From Carrie Nelson, why we should be providing protocols to follow. Potential safety is issue can be ignored. And we have Rachel back on. Hello, Rachel. How you
Good
doing? It's
morning.
okay. Don't worry about it. We continue. We keep going. So you have a lot of peeps from Denver here saying hi. So say hi back. So and so we are talking about mental health, and I'm telling the story of hoarder that I had to deal with some of the mental issues, and now moving on to transients, that's something that us as code enforcement officers tend to deal with. Have you dealt with something like that, Rachel?
Pete, you froze again. I'm hoping now that we are good to go. Your face is a little bit wonky, but what was the question?
No, have you personally dealt with anything with mental health issues in during your scope of work? Oh, she froze again. It's okay. Rachel, we'll bring you back in. Hold on. Let me see. And here we have Debbie Dorsey coming in. Hello, Debbie. How you doing? Let me see. Let me get Rachel here. So we tend to drive into these issues sometimes with technology. I apologize, but it's okay. So the one of the things that we really tend to focus on when it comes to mental health is preparing ourselves as code enforcement officers, because it's one of those components that you never know as code officers what you're going to deal with when you knock on someone's door. So one of the things that you know that that strikes me as a code field person, when I go out there to somebody's house and I knock on the door and somebody comes out and they've been going through a severe bout of depression, and your presence might just kind of drag them into another state of even more severe depression, where it can become very bad for them. And uh, in the city of Montebello, I also had one time I had a story where a young lady had uh, an issue where she believed her home was filled with mold, and when she would go to us, she would go to the health department. Everybody would go to our house and say, "Hey, we have mold in our unit," and we would go out there. You would see the walls completely free, and and she would cry and say, "Hey, there's mold here." I'm personally hypersensitive to things like mold or urine or feces and those kind of things, and my body would break out, and my body broke out. So I believed her. It's just I couldn't prove it. And I told her that, and I talked to the owner, and the owner's like, "Look, I've been out there several times. I can't. We can't find any mold. I hired a mold guy. Can't find any mold." I'm like, "Well, there's something here." Well, long story short, this young lady came to City Hall. She goes, "What? You don't care about me. The city hates me. The county hates me. Nobody cares." The husband would come in, he would apologize. "I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with her." And I got a call from a code enforcement officer, and from a neighboring city. He goes, "Hey, what's going on? This lady's on Facebook Live screaming and yelling about you." And next thing I know, she's on the freeway saying, "I hate Pete Roque. I hate code enforcement. They don't care about me." And literally, this lady's blocking the 60 freeway, and during the midday. And at the end of the day, that had police went and responded. We went out there and we got her some mental health services. It was very unfortunate, but those are the kind of things that we deal with because you can't control what people are going through. Let me see. Melvin, 24 inches or less doesn't have a permit. Do you have any comments? Legal backyard pools and code enforcement. Okay, we'll go into that, Melvin. Well, we'll go ahead and answer that question in a bit. Let me see. Oh, actually, Sean Walker answered the question. So here was the question, and here is the answer. Do you have any comments on legal backyard pools on code enforcement? And no comment on illegal pools. So let me see. Here's another question. Do you have any comments on illegal pools? Somebody said 24 inches doesn't need a permit. You do have illegal pools sometimes. People do tend to start digging their own pools and
Mhm.
illegally build a pool. I've seen it. I've seen illegal pool conversions where somebody converted into a living space. So there is a lot of regulations. I would really recommend that if you haven't adopted the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, that you take a look at it. It's a great model code that gives you a lot of information in regards to pool and pool safety, regarding fencing, alarms, pool height, fence height, those kind of things. It's a great resource. I would recommend that you read it. It's in the model code series from the ICC library. So, Rachel, can you hear me?
I can
We're
hear you.
good?
I'm back.
Awesome. So, okay, so
Technology is
we
our
had
best
another.
friend and our worst enemy.
Oh, that's okay. It's technology. What do you do? I've frozen here and there several times too. So here's another thing in the world of code enforcement. So in the state of Florida, as of July 1st, the state no longer allows anonymous complaints,
Sure.
which now means that if you do not leave your name information
Mhm.
in the state of Florida, you will not be able to respond to anonymous complaints. Now, this creates a lot of issues. Have you ever dealt with any issues regarding anonymous complaints?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you look at it from so many different angles because ultimately, when we're out there enforcing, I think a lot of us code enforcement officers take on that persona of, well, when the violation exists and we see that the violation exists, we become that complainant. We ultimately are the ones then who take that and run with it. So, do we really need that information? Sometimes it's necessary to have that information because sometimes you have code enforcement issues that aren't necessarily quality of life, right? So you have things that are neighbor to neighbor, just disputes. A lot of times that anonymity allows people to hide. And if it's something that truly affects their quality of life, we like to see them in the front and center, a part of the case with us. So I do see it go different ways. I mean, I work in a police department. So a lot of what we do, there isn't the ability to be anonymous. We require, driver's license information for a lot of what we do. Even there, it's a struggle as well because you have those complainants or even the violators sometimes when you're just handing them a quick notice to cut some weeds. Oh, by the way, can I get your driver's license? Same thing with the person that's complaining about those weeds. Oh, by the way, I need your driver's license, your social security number, all that information. So I can see it go both ways. How do they handle that where you are at and where you were previously at there, Pete?
I've served in several jurisdictions. So the one thing that I love about our job is that every jurisdiction is different. So you
Mm-hmm.
get to learn a little bit in a lot of different jurisdictions.
Right.
So in the city of Montebello, we had a lot of issues where code enforcement before I got on there was only reactive. And when I got on board, it became quasi reactive, and then we had some proactive. Well, some of the council members felt that we were purposely writing up their friends, and we would say, no, we received complaints. Well, where's the complaint? We would show them where the complaint. It always said anonymous. Well, how do we know it's not you? It's not us. I mean, we have better things to do than write up
That's
your friends or find out who your friends are. And so we would. One of the things that I ended up doing was I ended up putting together an anonymous complaint policy. Okay, so what the policy said was that we would not take anonymous complaints if because we needed a callback number. Now, if they gave us fictitious information, that was something that we couldn't do. So when it came to that, let me see, Rachel's back on. Okay, when it came back to doing that, and it was a good policy because it stopped people from constantly calling us with narking out all their neighbors. So we ended up actually it helped in our benefit, and we were able to lower our numbers. But at the same time, you had people that were really really scared. And one of the things we always tell folks, look, you can leave your information in case our officer needs to call you back. And even though you're not anonymous, it is confidential, and we
Mm.
do not give out your information. In California, there's a California Public Records Act that prohibits us from releasing that information unless it's through a subpoena. But that is an exemption, that we don't release public records as to who complained. So for us, we had to establish an anonymous complaint policy to avoid, because of counsel. But I mean, and it did work. We also established what we call a retaliatory complaint policy, which means we don't respond to your complaints until you solve your issue. So that was, when we knocked on someone's door and said, "Hey, you need to mow your grass." Well, what about that guy? What about that guy? And start pointing at everybody. I'm like, look,
Right.
we understand your concern. In this particular case, we had a concern about your particular property.
Right.
We're going to address your property. Once we're done with your property and your compliance, please feel free to narc out all your neighbors, and we'll go ahead and take those formal complaints and go ahead and address them. And what you saw is most people were hot at the moment that we addressed it. So when we told them that we'll definitely take the complaint and follow up, after that, they normally like, you know what, I don't want this on anybody else. And
Right.
most people would just not complain.
Right.
But there's a lot of agencies that say, you know what, if you're right there and they have their trash can at the neighbor across the street, you need to go address that.
Right. Everything in
and
the
and, and,
6
and
feet.
it's a good procedure. However, it just creates more caseload, because now if you're in a reactive code enforcement, now you're being proactive. So
Right.
it's every jurisdiction's different, and we're all it's not a cookie cutter type of business that we're in. So and we always have to make sure we abide by whatever policies and procedures. And if anybody's on this particular stream, if you want a copy of the anonymous complaint policy that I put together, I will definitely email you. You could email me at proke@fourleafinc.com. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. You can definitely email me. I will give you information. Same thing with the retaliatory complaint, or sample policy and procedure for you to look at, and maybe
Thank
that'll
you,
help
Pete.
you
That'll
guys
be awesome.
thing. Yeah, because with those kind of cases, we have priorities. Health and safety is always first, and then
Right.
the graffiti is kind of like, kind of the proactive work is always at the bottom. But it's good policies and procedures. So with anonymous complaints, let's go back to anonymous complaints. I love anonymous complaints. One of the things that I think hinders anonymous complaints is because sometimes you need additional information,
Sure.
you know and sometimes if you don't have a person to call back, you can't verify their complaint. Or sometimes you may need access to a neighboring property. Let's say that they see something that we can't see. And it's different in different cities, because in some cities say, hey, if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. But if the
Right.
neighbor sees it, and from a legal standpoint, if you're in their yard and you can see it from their yard, in various jurisdictions, it's considered public view.
Right.
And we use the thing, in California. Well, if the guys walk, even though, if you're walking nude in your house, nobody can see you, no big deal. But if you have the windows wide open and strutting around, then it becomes an issue of indecent exposure. Well, same
Right.
thing in the backyard. If the neighbor can see it and it's exposable, it's considered public view. Where in some cities don't go through by that process. So
Right.
so what's your thing on anonymous complaints? And would you say it was necessary, not necessary?
Like I said before, it goes back and forth because ultimately, once we view what the issue is and we see that there's a complaint, we take it and run with it and we solve the issue. Especially when it's something, a blight nuisance, such as, junk, trash, debris, that's very visible from a public right of way. Is it necessary for us to have the complainant's information on a case like that? Probably not. But in a case where it's an occupancy issue and they're concerned about their neighbor having, 15 individuals unrelated living in the same home, yeah, that's an instance where that doesn't necessarily affect the world's quality of life. So I'm going to need that information from the complainant. I'm going to want to call back several times to gather and obtain more information that's going to help me prove or disprove if this is actually going on. So I can see a good use for it in certain situations. But just like everything else we do in code enforcement, it's so case by case, really case by case.
Awesome. Cool. So here's another one. So like I said, we go through every single different source of information out in the code world. Here's another one that came out. It was due to COVID. It was in the state of Tennessee. What's going on is they're going to the Supreme Court because some of the businesses had to relocate to their home. So it creates a home occupancy and a land use issue. So what that means is some of these businesses were operating out of home, and a lot of land use regulations don't allow you to have customers in your home. So, so there was a story, and let me put that article here in the chat for you guys, so you guys can kind of peruse and see what's going on. What happened was because of COVID, it just kind of became more convenient for folks to work out at home. It's a loss. So a lot of people lost their leases. They lost their business locations, so they're operating from home. In this particular place, this lady had a hair salon, and the city came down on her saying that she was in violation of a land use issue. Well, what happens in that particular case, the land use, the she felt that it was unfair because of COVID, she lost everything, and so she's fighting the city in court, and it's going to the state Supreme Court that she should be allowed to run her business out of her home. So what kind of so Rachel, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
So what do you think on the home occupancy issue when people are working out of their home? What do you think?
Home occupancy becomes a dangerous, slippery slope in our world here. Especially like you were saying, I think you even touched on the fact that we're coming out of a pandemic. Families are having to live together now because of financial related hardships. So there's going to be a lot of reasons why we're seeing these higher occupancy issues. Ultimately, with the working, I see an issue there as well. You bring in people, you're changing the characteristic of the neighborhood. So again, case by case, you have to look at everything for what it is.
Yeah, and that goes into land use 101. I mean, we see a lot of different things. For example, I mean, I've seen, people do churches out of their home, like full on churches. I saw a guy doing archery in the backyard. Uh, I've seen people doing horseback or riding lessons in someone's home. I mean, we've seen it all. I think I've seen a lot of things. Even marijuana grows. Somebody can say, "Hey, my illegal dispensary was shut down. I mean, my dispensary was shut down, so I had to move my operation to my home." I mean, it's a plethora of things that people can claim, and this sets a precedent. So onto what happens in your home. So in the state of California, we have what we now call micro kitchens. Have you ever heard of this?
No, not
Okay,
here in
so
Colorado yet.
in the state of California, what somebody can do now is they can basically turn their home into a restaurant. So, and this is a bill that was particularly sponsored by some of these vacation rental places to make it a destination to eat a particular type of delicacy or gourmet food.
Okay.
And so it was heavily sponsored by several people. I don't want to say the names on this platform, but it became a tourist destination. And so a lot of the counties were like, "Hey, we're not going to enforce that because it's in people's homes. They shouldn't have restaurants. There's a lot of health concerns, animal pest concerns." Yeah, let me see. So, so what happened is called a micro kitchen food operation, something it's MKHO, home operation, micro kitchen home operation, called Miko. And so essentially it says that you can have up to 30 people at your home as a restaurant, and you don't have to go through a lot of the the zoning issues, but you could have to go through licensing and the health department. So and it was one of those things where every we had tons of meetings with stakeholders on, hey, is it going to be a city thing that the city's going to enforce, or is it going to be a thing that the county is going to enforce, or the state health department's going to? And
Right.
nobody wanted that responsibility. So, but are we allowing it? Yes. And right now, nobody tends to be responsible for it. And once I think it becomes more prevalent, people are going to start doing it a lot more. Same thing with Airbnb. Yeah, it's
How
insane,
does
right?
how does that impact the community though? I mean, changing the characteristic when we're seeing these micro restaurants or micro kitchens, how does that impact these residential neighborhoods and communities?
Well, see, and that's the thing. A lot, there's a lot of people don't know about these things. Like Sean Walker said, that is crazy and gross. I'm not gonna lie. I've eaten from a taco lady, or the hot dog with the wrapped bacon. I mean, I've done that. I mean, it's good stuff. But I also been to homes where they make this stuff, and I'm telling you, it's such a big turnoff sometimes.
Sure.
And it's one of those, yeah, yeah, it's just not the best, not the cleanliest place. I mean, I've thrown out corn for illegal corn vending, and you see like little roach imprints on the in the buckets, and I've seen people wash corns in an alley, before they load them up to the cart. So I mean, there's a lot of food handling issues that I particularly have
Sure.
problems with. But at the end of the day, if the law says that they're allowed to do it, as long as they're doing it safely, I mean, we really can't say anything, because that is state law.
And
And in California, we also decriminalized street vending.
okay.
So before, we can confiscate goods and dispose of perishable foods, but now it's become harder. I mean, you have to do it under the health and safety code, but it's become a lot harder. So what happens now is that we have encroachment issues, we have traffic issues, because
Right.
what the state did says, hey, you can't prohibit them, you have to create a process to allow them to be there. And they made it, and each city made it kind of difficult for them to do it, but I mean, they could still do it. So we have to enforce other regulations like encroachments. If they're at a gas station or like some parking lot, we have to make sure that they have permission, and that they add them to their business license. I mean, it's insane over here in in California sometimes.
Oh, I like that you find different ways to enforce different things when you have a that's helpful.
Well, in code enforcement, one of the things is that we have to be creative sometimes. I mean, this is, I think, what sets us apart from different positions in the city, because we have to find solutions. I know, I think I told you the story before of the guy was parked on the wrong side of the street, and we got a call saying, hey, this guy's parked on the, and this was a total political play back in the day. The guy's parked on the right side of the street, so I'm like, hey, oh, by the way, it's so and so's car. Well, do not cite him for being unparked. Well, I got a call, he has to get cited, and I got another call saying he should not be cited. So what do I do? I mean, so me as a rabble rouser, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna park him. I'm not gonna cite him for parking on the wrong side of the street. So I ended up citing him, but I parked him. I cited him for parking 12 inches away from the curb. More than
Right.
12. So he was on the opposite side of the street. So at the end of the day, when I got in trouble, I didn't get in trouble, but they were like, you weren't supposed to cite him, or no, you told me not to cite him on the wrong side of the street.
For this
So I mean,
particular thing.
so I ended up parking them for being excessive of 12 inches away from, no, 18 inches away from the curb. And then that was my parking enforcement days. And parking enforcement is a whole different gambit of issues, because nobody likes getting a parking ticket. So,
Right. Right. No, it's like
Yeah.
that in a grand scheme of things. Code enforcement is very, just because the code doesn't say you can't have an elephant doesn't mean you can have an elephant.
Yeah.
There's always a way around.
Right. So, I mean, it's insane, this kind of things that we see out in the field, you know. So, so here's another one that we see, and I'll go ahead and put the link up on the web page real quick. And this is where we have animal control that's being introduced into code enforcement, and across the country, code enforcement pulls a lot of duties. Animal control being one of them. I've never dealt with animal control. I'm not scared of dogs, but I fear dogs. The first time I ever pet a horse, I had just heard a story of how the horse hoofed the guy to death, and I'm petting the horse, and the horse like galloped, and I'm like, that was it for that was a deal breaker. I'm like, I don't want anything to do with horses, even ponies. Like, oh, you know. Yesterday, I was hanging out with Debbie Dorsey, who's on the call, and what do you call it? I saw we saw a horse, and I was like, she was like, "Petty, it's nice." I'm like, "No." So, but she goes, "No, you gotta feed the horse." I'm like, "Okay." So I fed the horse. It was pretty funny. We were doing something in San Diego and just ended up feeding horses. So that's code enforcement day, how it takes you.
All encompassing.
So, anyways, back to this story. In the city, they don't want one council member wants code enforcement to oversee animal control, and the other one says no, we shouldn't do that because it does it they won't be able to respond to the other calls for service. So they want two separate people instead of having a code enforcement do everything, because as you know, being in code enforcement, we tend to do so much and we're all over the place. One, if some of us are do parking enforcement, that we're not going to people's complaints. Some of us, we do restaurant inspections, some of us do stormwater, some of us do animal control. You're one of those folks that do animal control, and you just sent me a picture the other day of you in a bat. So
Yeah, that was a fun
um,
one.
yeah. So, what's your thing on animal control and code enforcement?
For me, it's very different. I look at it like no matter what I'm enforcing, I'm going to take it on and enforce it at 150%. There are challenges, though. I mean, my calls for service are high on the animal side, as you mentioned. I had a gentleman bit by a bat the other day, so I had to go collect the bat, work with the health department to get it euthanized, get it over for testing. There's so many things that are all encompassing with that position that ultimately.
Yeah, I think your audio cut, Rachel. I think your audio is cutting off. So that I know. You gotta
Thanks
love
for bearing
technology.
with me today. This is a stressful day. I'm so sorry
Okay, it's all
for
good. Don't
all
worry
you
about
on the
it.
call. Thank you for bearing with us.
It's all
Appreciate
good,
you.
and it happens. I mean, I've been on a call before, and I'm like, yeah, I keep cutting out. I'm like, and it happens, and it's okay. But
Thanks for
what
being a good sport, Pete.
no, it's it's okay. No, you know what? End of the day, we're doing here. You're here on your time off, so I think anybody in the call appreciates your time, and you know what? You're a wealth of knowledge, and we really appreciate you being here and always taking the time to do this stuff. And you know, um, these are conversations that we have to have, and I love for the audience to chime in and tell us some good war stories, because I think us learning from each other is what makes this show.
Right, right.
And so back to animal control, we didn't get to hear what she said. So if you
Well,
could kind of go
ultimately,
back.
it's about providing the best possible customer service no matter what you're doing, whether it's pulling a snake out of a pergola or dealing with a sump pump or stormwater issue. You're going to approach everything, or at least I'd like to think we as code enforcement officers who are a different breed approach everything with the end goal in mind of taking care of the citizen or taking care of whatever it is. So my philosophy in where I work is if I can do it, I will. If I can't, I will figure out who can do it for you. So you go into it, you get multiple odd calls that you've never dealt with before, and you just try to find the best possible solution. So I kind of told you a little bit about the bat. Last week we had a moose sighting, so I spent about 5 hours driving our town looking for a baby moose that had come down from the mountains. So you just never know what you're going to get. And then the next call is a parking complaint. And then my call after that was another drainage issue. So you just never know what you're going to get ultimately, and providing that best possible customer service and solving the issue or bringing compliance to whatever it is where I'm at with that.
And you bring an interesting point because you're coming out of the police department. So
Mm-hmm.
in police department, you have calls for service, correct?
Right.
So coming out, do you normally have with and you have to squeeze your follow-ups
Correct.
into your day, which is, a lot of us don't have to deal with that. As
Right.
far as doing calls for service, we normally have like, we do our re-inspects, or, we
Mm-hmm.
have a list and we just go out. And yeah, there's calls for service, but they've been a day away where you're kind of like, you got to go.
Right.
And and it's, yeah, that's amazing. I give you mad props for that. I couldn't do it. And one of the things that we did in my last jurisdiction, we ended up putting everybody on a daily schedule, just because people would say, oh, I have 400 cases or 300 cases. I'm like, well, you're not handling all of them in one day. He goes, just handle these today. That's all I want you to
Mm-hmm.
handle. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard. Just this amount, and it made their life a lot easier, you
Right.
know, because if you have to do 5 follow-up calls to see if somebody got a permit, that really is not going to take you all day. It's going to
Right.
take you maybe like an hour tops, but there's some that you have to take forever, that like if you have to go to a property that may be substandard, you
Mm-hmm.
need a level of detail, and you have to come back and do a report. And I mean, it takes some time. So the fact that I don't know how I would go around looking for a moose, but end of the day. And the thing is with animal control, what in the article, it's people don't realize that for a lot of people, me growing up, the dog was just the dog. But
Mm-hmm.
to other people, it's a family member. you
Right.
know and 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 it's a hard thing when you have to say, hey, your dog got loose and got hit by a car, or it's one of those things that you kind of, you're like that doctor on Days of Our Lives, like giving the bad news to the family member, like, hey, the dog down the street chewed up your cat. It's insane. But I think, you know I think animal control itself, it's a full-time job.
It
you know
is.
and I think not having any experience or having strategy into going into starting animal control, it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely. I went into it with no experience. My everything for me is code enforcement, and they're like, "Oh, you'll get maybe a few barking dog calls," but I'd say a lot of what I do is that animal. But again, it's about taking each situation and task and dealing with it with smile on your face and providing the best possible service. So,
yeah, and a lot of our jurisdictions do have animal nuisance complaints.
mhm.
So, and we have not nuisance
Right.
ordinances, like with the exotic animals. In my first jurisdiction, we had a guy that the neighbor cat lady complained about the guy next door who had an alligator, and her cats kept going missing. And comes to comes to find out that the owner would lay food out, and just in case like a wild animal and the alligator would snatch him up. And we ended up taking the alligator, and the guy was super devastated over his alligator. I
Oh my
mean,
goodness.
we called him the crocodile man, or but I mean, yeah, that was the first time I ever saw an alligator. Like, I'm not from Florida, and so I was like, wow,
So, do you
to me
coordinate with
everything.
wildlife or coordinate with somebody to take it? What'd you do with the alligator, Pete?
It wasn't me. It was animal control. We had a separate animal control division, so they handled it. But of course, more of a curiosity, us the code enforcement officers, we go out there and like, let's see, because technically it's in our community code, it's a nuisance, so we get to kind of, some of us are very curious critters, so we go out there and we check things out, and like, wow, I just wanted to see the alligator, so but
Awesome.
yeah, yeah. So it was a cat lady versus an alligator owner, but both in violation of animal ordinances. So hey, what do? We run into these crazy situations.
We
So
do.
Okay. So let me see. Let's see what else is going on in the world of code enforcement. Okay. So here's another story. Okay, and this maybe go for something positive, which is a story in regards to creating a tool lending shed service in is it McAllen in McAllen? I think it's Texas, McAllen, Texas. And so basically, what the city did is created, like a free rental shed for people can borrow lawnmowers, hedge trimmers, painting guns. I mean, so they basically loaded it up, and you check out these tools in order to get compliance because as code
Right.
enforcement, you hear people might say, "Well, I can't afford this or I can't afford that," and and the city does give them an opportunity. And in code enforcement, we have to find a lot of solutions sometimes. So
Mhm.
a lot of times, what do? We get we get the Boy Scouts to come in and help. We get these religious organizations, these nonprofit organizations.
Right.
We get different the Veterans Affairs. You know, um, and if you think outside the box, you can get realtors to help out because if the neighborhood spruces up, the prices of houses go up. So this is a good program. They lend people tools. I don't know what the requirements are, but what do you think about programs like this? And do you have a similar program?
We don't have similar programs. This is something I think is a beautiful program, something I'd love to do because, we have a job to do. We have to get compliance, but we can't bring them into compliance for them. No matter how hard, some of us really want to go at night and mow their lawn, mow the nice, sweet old lady's lawn that can't take care of it. We certainly can't do that. And sometimes we don't have other resources. So something like that, it would be awesome. Providing them, putting that onus back on them, like we talked about in our previous show, getting them to take personal responsibility for what's going on in their life and their hardship. But providing them a solution to say, hey, I know you stated your lawnmower wasn't working. We've got a great program. You can come and check one out from us, rent it from us. I think that is an awesome resource to have. I'm going to take that article and see what I can do to make that happen in my place.
Right? No, I'm serious, and this is one of the reasons why this program exists. And thank you for this. Um, just having resources out there, like when we go through these topics, home occupancy, that's something that people aren't thinking about,
Right.
or the anonymous complaints. These are things that some of us deal with and we don't think about. And same thing with this one. We're solving a problem that wasn't there before. And again, it's a lot of it has to do with education in the community, like being able to educate the public and saying, hey, look, this city in Texas is doing this, or Tennessee is dealing with this, or Florida is dealing with this. And if you don't have a platform like this, you don't communicate what's going on.
Right.
Because you know what we see Texas is doing with anonymous complaints, they could either succeed and have a new model where people are more responsible on who they're complaining on, or it can completely fail and say, hey, people aren't taking the time because they don't want to deal with all the backlash of the potential repercussions of advising somebody that's not taking care of their property.
Right.
So I mean, it can go both ways. Same thing with Tennessee, and it can go. If the Supreme Court says they should have their business, it changes the whole landscape of land use in Tennessee. But if they say no, you know what, you can't turn your home into a gun range, you know, this, you're not going to have a lot of folks. You're going to have less complaints.
Right.
But again, the state can make exemptions and they can make rules. Say, okay, these are allowed and these are not allowed. Because if you're allowing a beauty shop, why not allow a mechanic shop, or
Right.
why not allow I don't know, what other business do we see people run out of their home that they're really not
Music business,
a
we have
music business,
youth
yeah.
groups, local youth groups, that kind of stuff. That's I see a lot of that.
Yeah,
Real estate.
yeah, and we go, and, eh, some people turn their homes into contractors' yard because it's
Mhm.
cheaper for them to store the like
Right.
lumber and materials at their home. And for me, like and I always tell people, look, I can care less as long as you meet the minimum standard. We're not here to make your home a home and gardens cover on a magazine. What we want to do is for you to maintain the minimum standard. So the minimum standard is cutting your grass. Just cut your grass. Am I gonna like write you up for having little patches? No.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's the intent of the intent of the law and the spirit of the law that we have to really look at. Am I gonna, jam up a household with a 6-inch dandelion? I'm not, but if it's a million dandelions, and that's another issue.
Right.
So, and we as code enforcement officers, we have to use our common sense and judgment. So these things are so important that we do that we really talk about these issues because we as code enforcement officers have to communicate, and our best tool in our job is communicating with others, right? you know
Absolutely.
it's our but why are we not communicating with each other as code officers to make us better equipped and better people,
Right. Well,
right?
that's how they write ordinances. I mean, jurisdictional matrices. What's the next department or the next division or jurisdiction doing? So, yeah.
And it happens, and but a lot of times you can take the positive stuff and include that in your ordinance as well, like the shed program. Great program. I've seen this program before in other places, and so and there's a lot of programs out there that we want to showcase, and if it's here in the news, then that's good. Um, so
Means it's
um,
working or it's not
it's
working.
working.
Either way, right?
Yeah, yeah. Let me see. So we're scheduled to have Miss Muela come on for a quick second to talk about the event next week. So we're not going to be here next week because we're going to be where, Miss Patterson?
We are going to be at Women Coffee with Women. We are CC Miss CC hosts the event, the Women Leaders in Code Enforcement Coffee with My Girlfriends, and I get to take part in sitting on with her.
Yeah, it's a great event. I love it. Let me see, and see where is she at. She's supposed to be on. So, but let me really quickly send her another link. Let me see, because she wants to talk about that and a lot of other things. So, so
I
other than
believe
that,
Miss Anna will
can
be
you
joining us as well.
yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the coffee with my
Right
girlfriends?
when we're having technical difficulties again.
Oh, geez, Louise. Okay, and then that's my bad. Sorry, I'm messing with the program. So let me see. I am gonna
So,
send.
Pete, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but this week,
I can hear you. Oh, I can't hear you anymore. There she is. You're muted, by the way, Rachel. Hey, Cecilia, can you hear us?
Of course I can.
All right. So what you got going on, Miss Muela?
Well, we're enjoying this Friday morning, preparing obviously for the end of the week, wrapping up, and excited for next week. We have very exciting things happening next week, as you know, Pete and Rachel. Um, I don't know, Pete, if you've already talked about it, but we have our Officer Safety Day training that is on July 29th. It is definitely a do not miss. So much great information that we're going to be sharing with awesome presenters. And there's just so much to learn when it comes to that particular topic, as we all know. And in addition to that, Rachel and I will be hosting Coffee with My Girlfriends on Friday, the 30th of July. That's at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard. And we're going to be talking about the power of mentorship and how important is that, in our line of work as we're maneuvering through the building industry, as we're growing, as we're looking at perhaps new avenues that we want to grow into professionally. It's just really important and really awesome to be able to have that mentorship component and really understand how that works. So lots of great things.
Oh, don't forget on the day before the safety training, we are doing 1 hour presentation the the uh
Coachella Valley.
Coachella Valley.
Of ICC.
Debbie's gonna kill me. Yes, yeah, Coachella Valley. Yeah, we're doing a code enforcement 101 training. If you go to the Coachella Valley website, you'll be able to see it. And she, what do you call it? She booked us. We're doing a code 101, and basically that is to inform the building officials on how we do things, why we do that, and how important it is to do things. It's not just your basic 101 as to just giving you like, hey, this is an inoperable vehicle. It's more of kind of like, this is why we need to really train our officers to be able to communicate with the general public on what it is that we do.
Yeah, Pete, here's the other side to that. I always tease in my classes that I put together for ICC and for Standards and Codes Academy. When we think about code enforcement as a profession, none of us really grew up and went to school and said, hey, I want to be a code officer when I grow up, right? Most of us didn't even know what that was, that even existed. And some of us that have worked in code enforcement for many, many years have seen it grow from an optional service to a non-essential to an essential. And it's definitely become multifaceted in a lot of variety of different ways. And so for those folks that are interested in a career in code enforcement, this is the presentation that you want to definitely tap into to learn a little bit more about, like Pete said, the ins and outs. What is code enforcement? Who are we? What are we? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What growth and potential there is when you come into code enforcement. And many of us, as Rachel has mentioned before, and some of these talks is, you have a direct care for the communities that you serve. You really, really do. And that's why many of us are still in this profession. So it's a training that is geared to new folks that want to come into the profession, folks that may have an interest, folks that may already be in the profession, to our building inspection staff, to our fire inspection staff, pretty much anybody that has some sort of interest into what code enforcement is.
So, Cecilia, can you give us a quick overview of the officer safety one on the 29th?
Yes.
Oh.
So it's a 3-part component. So we're going to be talking with Gary Weinstein of Parents of Autistic Children. And Gary is a remarkable nationwide trainer who has worked with first responders, who has worked with medical field staff, training them on how to interact effectively with folks that perhaps have autism or on the autism spectrum, the different levels of autism, learning how to really recognize what that is for our safety, for their safety, so that we can have better communication breakthroughs when we're out in the field, so that we can interact safely while we're out there. I think what happens with autism, sometimes we don't really recognize it. We don't really talk about it. Mental health is something that almost has been kind of a taboo. And so breaking the stigma of just labeling something, oh, mental health, and walking away from it or exacerbating the situation is something that we definitely want to avoid. So that is going to be a remarkable training that is going to be, packed with a wealth of knowledge from Gary. And in addition to that, we're going to be talking to the FBI regarding human trafficking. Human trafficking isn't something that we always think about in code enforcement. In fact, most of the time when we're thinking about code enforcement, we think, nuisance cases, trash debris, substandard living, but we don't really think about the things that perhaps may be indicators in those homes, in those apartment units, in those abandoned homes that we're going into, even down to the person on the corner that's selling fresh fruits. Some of those persons are there because they have to pay some sort of fee that they owe someone, right? For whatever it is, whatever work that they're paying off. And so human trafficking comes in a variety of different ways, and it's super important for us as code officers and field staff to recognize what those indicators are and to work collaboratively with our agencies in the FBI as well as our law enforcement agencies. And then finally, we're going to have a presentation from our animal control expert. And Pete, you can help me with his name because I don't want to butcher
Kevin Hurst. His name is Kevin Hurst. Yes.
Kevin Hurst. And Kevin, again, also brings a wealth of knowledge in the animal control arena, has a lot of great pointers, lots of great information, not just, avoiding those pesky little ankle biters, but really understanding their behavior, really understanding maybe the cues that they're putting out, from body language to, their bark to whimpering to anything that may be indicative of a possible attack, against a field staff person. I know myself, I've had ankle biters myself while I've been doing inspections. And so it's really important to understand, the mechanisms of how animals behave so that we can, conduct our field inspections safely and interact with animals that are on property safely, as well as have that communication that strengthens that, interaction that we have with that property owner or tenant.
Awesome. Thank you, Cecilia. It's always a pleasure to see you. And I know with these Coffee with My Girlfriends monthly, you're gearing up to your Women Leaders in Code Enforcement Symposium for 2022. I am so excited. I thank you for allowing me to participate, and Rachel too. We look forward to it. I know you're already lining up some top-notch talent out there, and it's awesome. You are the originator. You are, it's hard to emulate what we've done, and I really appreciate all
Thank you.
the work that goes into what you do, and it's just appreciated. Thank you for being so present in our code community.
Yeah,
And she
no, thank you too, Pete, and thank you to Rachel, and uh, to make a little shameless plug there. Thank you so much for bringing it up, Pete. Yes, the Women Leaders in Code Enforcement. Oh my goodness. Let me tell you guys, if you didn't make it to this last one, it is a do not miss. We have a broad range of talent, women that are in the field, amazing stories, leadership components, mentorship, ability to be in a room with other fellow colleagues that are coming up in the building world, that are in the building leadership roles right now. Pete, you are correct in that 2022 is going to be just as fierce as 2021. We have amazing presenters, one of them which is here on the screen today, Miss Rachel Patterson, who's going to bring forth an awesome presentation, as well as, other awesome things that we're going to be offering. But I don't want to give away too much because I'm excited to make that announcement. But mark your calendars, March 23rd through 25th, 2022. Look out for Women Leaders in Code Enforcement.
Awesome, Cecilia, and thank you very much for joining us. I think Rachel dipped out due to some technical issues, but she's going to come right back on to give us our fairly wells, and there she is. So with that, thank you. We really appreciate your time, and I will see you. I will see you next time. Well, I'll see you next week a bunch of times. So I know I'm getting sick and tired of you. So, but anyways, so we'll take it over to Rachel. Rachel, you're good. Good to go. Rachel's frozen. All right. It's all good.
Right.
Thanks for dealing with my internet issues, whatever they are. I'm so apologetic, and I am
we can hear you. You're perfect. You're perfect. So with that, we'll go ahead and say goodbye. Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you for joining us today for our latest edition of Code Concepts with Pete and Rachel. We'll join you next week on Women Leaders in Code Enforcement with Coffee with Girlfriends.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.